On November 24th, 1971, a man using the name Dan Cooper boarded a Northwest Orient flight in Portland, Oregon. He was calm, he was polite, he was wearing a dark suit and carrying a briefcase. He ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, and handed the flight attendant a note. That note changed everything. It said, "I have a bomb." Nobody who saw him that day could agree on what he looked like. Somewhere between 40 and 50 years old, medium height, dark complexion, brown or black hair, combed back neatly, a dark business suit, a black tie with a mother of pearl tie pin, sunglasses. He looked, by every account, like an ordinary businessman on an ordinary flight. He paid for his ticket in cash. He gave a fake name. And he sat quietly in seat 18C at the back of the plane, waiting. Shortly after takeoff, Dan Cooper passed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She assumed it was a lonely businessman trying to flirt, and slipped it unread into her pocket. Cooper leaned over and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Florence opened the note. It read, "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I will use it if necessary. I want you to sit next to me. You are being hijacked." Florence sat down beside him. Cooper opened his briefcase briefly, showing her a tangle of red wires and cylinders. Then he calmly closed it again and made his demands. Dan Cooper's demands were precise. $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills, 4 parachutes, 2 primary, 2 reserve, a fuel truck ready to refuel the plane upon landing in Seattle, and a meal for the crew and passengers. He was calm throughout. He paid for his own drink during the negotiation. The FBI scrambled. The airline agreed to every demand. The plane landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, where Cooper's requests were delivered to the aircraft on the tarmac. The 36 passengers were released. The crew stayed. And then, Cooper ordered the plane back into the air. The plane took off from Seattle, headed toward Mexico City, flying low and slow at Cooper's instruction. Below 10,000 feet, landing gear down, flaps at 15 degrees. Cooper had the crew stay in the cockpit. He tied the money bag to himself. At approximately 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the Cascade Mountains of southern Washington, the rear staircase of the Boeing 727 was lowered. The crew felt a pressure change, then nothing. When they landed, Cooper was gone. The rear stairs were still open. 1 parachute was left behind, and $200,000 had vanished into the stormy night sky above one of the most remote wilderness areas in America. The FBI launched one of the most extensive manhunts in American history. Military personnel, FBI agents, local law enforcement. They searched thousands of square miles of dense Pacific Northwest wilderness. They found nothing. Not a parachute, not a footprint, not a single piece of equipment. The terrain was brutal. Dense forest, steep ravines, freezing rivers. Surviving a jump in those conditions at night in a storm would have been extraordinarily difficult. Many investigators believed Cooper died on impact, but without a body, the case stayed open. In February 1980, 9 years after the hijacking, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was on a family picnic along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. He was digging in the sandy riverbank when he found something. 3 bundles of rotting $20 bills, still banded together. When the serial numbers were checked, they matched exactly. These were D.B. Cooper's bills, 294 of them, worth $5,800. Of the remaining $194,000, not a single bill has ever been found. And the location raised more questions than answers. The money was downstream, in the wrong direction from the expected jump zone. Over the decades, investigators and amateur researchers have identified hundreds of potential suspects. The FBI officially investigated more than 1,000 people. Several men confessed on their deathbeds, including a man named Dwayne Weber, whose wife claimed he told her, "I am Dan Cooper," before he died. Others pointed to a man called Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., who pulled off an almost identical hijacking just 4 months later. Some researchers believe Cooper had military parachute training and knowledge of the Boeing 727's unique rear staircase, suggesting either a former soldier or airline industry insider. None have ever been definitively proven. In July 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI officially announced it was suspending active investigation into the D.B. Cooper case. The announcement shocked true crime enthusiasts worldwide. The Bureau stated it would redirect resources toward other priorities, but emphasized the case was suspended, not closed. The file remains open. Anyone with credible information is still encouraged to come forward. No statute of limitations applies to air piracy. If D.B. Cooper is alive today, he would be in his late 80s or 90s. If he survived the jump and lived out his life somewhere, he took his secret to the grave. Three main theories have dominated the D.B. Cooper case for 50 years. Theory 1. Cooper died in the jump. The conditions were almost unsurvivable. Pitch black, stormy weather, freezing temperatures, dense wilderness, no landmarks. If he landed in the Columbia River or ravine, his body may never have been recovered. Theory 2. Cooper survived and lived anonymously. The money was partially recovered downstream, suggesting it may have been buried and later washed out by flooding, consistent with a survivor hiding it. Some researchers believe Cooper blended back into ordinary American life and died of natural causes, his secret intact. Theory 3, and perhaps the most tantalizing, is that someone knows. A family member, a friend, someone who suspected, and chose to stay silent. D.B. Cooper became something no other criminal in American history ever became: a folk hero. Within weeks of the hijacking, he appeared on t-shirts, bumper stickers, and Halloween costumes. Bars were named after him. Songs were written about him. Films were made. He pulled off the only unsolved airplane hijacking in American aviation history, and somehow the public rooted for him. Perhaps because he didn't hurt anyone. Perhaps because he outsmarted the FBI. Perhaps because he represents something deeply human, the fantasy of taking everything, leaving everything behind, and disappearing forever. The discovery of those rotting bills in 1980 remains the single most important physical clue in the entire case, and the most confusing. The money was found in a location inconsistent with the expected jump zone. The bills were deteriorated and still banded with the original FBI rubber bands, suggesting they had been underwater or buried for years rather than spent. Some researchers believe the money washed there after being buried upstream by Cooper himself. Others believe it proves Cooper never made it out of the river. One compelling theory suggests the money bundle fell from the sky separately from Cooper. Perhaps the bag broke apart during the jump, and Cooper landed elsewhere with the bulk of the money, which has never been found. One detail has fascinated investigators for 50 years. The Boeing 727 is the only commercial aircraft with a rear air stair, a retractable staircase at the back of the plane that can be lowered during flight. This was not publicly known information in 1971. Cooper knew it. He knew exactly how to operate it. He knew the plane could fly slowly enough and low enough for a parachute jump. He knew the fuel capacity. He knew the flight range. This level of knowledge suggests either military parachute training, aviation industry experience, or both. He wasn't guessing. He had planned this in extraordinary detail. 50 years after the hijacking, thousands of amateur investigators around the world are still actively working the D.B. Cooper case. Online forums, DNA analysis groups, parachute tracking teams, historians who have dedicated decades to a single case. In 2021, a group called the Case Breakers, a team of former FBI agents, journalists, and military investigators, announced they had identified D.B. Cooper as a man named Robert Rackstraw, a U.S. Army paratrooper and convicted conman who died in 2019. The FBI reviewed their findings and declined to confirm. The debate continues to this day. D.B. Cooper remains the only person in American aviation history to commit unsolved air piracy. The FBI worked the case for 45 years. Over 1,000 suspects investigated. Tens of thousands of man hours, millions of dollars spent, and the answer, after all of it, is still nothing. He may have died in those dark mountains the same night he jumped. He may have walked out of the wilderness and lived a long, quiet life. He may be buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, his identity known only to those who loved him and chose to stay silent. We will never know. And perhaps that is exactly the way Dan Cooper planned it. D.B. Cooper, one hijacking, $200,000, 4 parachutes, 0 arrests, the only unsolved air piracy in American history. If you want more stories like this, the ones with no clean ending, the cases that change how you see the world, subscribe. Hit the bell. A new case every day. And some of them make this one look simple,